Hello everybody, and how are you? I hope you're well. I do. Sorry, I've just been trying to set it up so I can show you pictures from the book. I haven't got it sorted very well yet. It's very mechanical. I have to just sort of like click, find it, open it, drag it around on my screen so it's where you can see it. And then when I want to show you the next one, I have to do the same thing because I really don't have great skills when it comes to using OBS yet. But this is one of the cool things about life, is that you can learn how to do something, do it for a while, accept the fact that you have skills at a certain level, do it for a while, and as you get confident and comfortable and practiced at that, you can add in extra skills. That's the best way to learn things. That way you get time to consolidate what you know before you add to it too much and lose the whole lot. Anyway, hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories to you, whoever you are, wherever you are, and you're most welcome to treat them like bedtime stories. Find somewhere snug or cool, depending on the time of year it is for you as you're listening. Make sure you've got something to drink to keep yourself hydrated, something to nibble on if you are the snacky sort, and somewhere comfortable to sit or lie while you're listening. I happen to know that there are a few people who will do study or work projects while they're listening to stories, so I don't mind. I won't engage with the chat that happens in the chat box while I'm reading. But I will, if anyone's made any comments that are appropriate to respond to, I will, between chapters, read out and answer or talk. Other than that, I tend to interrupt myself and get lost, which is why on YouTube I refer to these as rough reads. I seem to have ADHD, which means that I can read something, my mind will suddenly be slightly distracted by something that's kind of related to what we're talking about. I may explain whatever it is that we've just read about, because not all of the older authors will do so. They will assume that everyone knows what they're talking about. And in this day and age, we don't have that life experience. But sometimes then I will try to get back to where I was reading, and I then have to find it on the page because my brain has just gone, that's gone, I don't know where it is. Anyway, so have a good laugh at me, I don't mind. And if you're watching this on Twitch, you're welcome to when I do something stupid, to clip it. And we'll make up a funny video sometime, which has got a bunch of stuff like that. Just for laughs. Anyway, so we are reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri. Apparently that's the German and Swiss way to say her name. And we are reading chapter 5, which is called A Railroad Journey. So let's carry on. Chapter 5, A Railroad Journey. Heidi was now in her 8th year, so she's been up the mountain for a while with grandfather. She had learnt all kinds of useful things from her grandfather. She knew how to look after the goats as well as anyone, and Little Swan and Little Bear, that's grandfather's goats, would follow her like two faithful dogs and give a loud bleat of pleasure when they heard her voice. Twice during the course of this last winter, Peter had brought up a message from the schoolmaster at Dorfli, who sent word to Alm Uncle that he ought to send Heidi to school as she was over the usual age. I'm not too sure what the usual age was in Switzerland, and I've just realised you're probably hearing me talking to myself a little bit after I'm talking to myself, as well as me talking, because my headphones are next to my microphone and the sound wasn't turned off. Sorry. We'll get there. I'll make sure my phone volume is turned off too, okay? Right, carrying on. I don't know what the school age was in Switzerland at the time, but she's 8 years old, so I'm guessing that means she's older than whatever the school starting age is. Who sent word to Alm Uncle that he ought to send Heidi to school as she was over the usual age, and ought indeed to have gone the winter before. Okay, 7, 6.5, something like that. Uncle had sent word back each time that the schoolmaster would find him at home if he had anything he wished to say to him. Remember, uncle is the name that the villagers use for Heidi's grandfather. So uncle sent word back each time that the schoolmaster would find him at home if he had anything he wished to say to him, but that he did not intend to send Heidi to school. As Heidi was running about one sunny March morning and had just jumped over the water trough for the 10th time at least, she nearly fell backwards into it with fright, for there in front of her stood an old gentleman dressed in black. When he saw how startled she was, he said in a kind voice, "Don't be afraid of me, for I am very fond of children. Shake hands." "You must be the Heidi I've heard of. Where is your grandfather?" "He is sitting by the table making round wooden spoons," Heidi informed him as she opened the door. It was the old village pastor from Dorfli, who had been a neighbour of Uncle's when he lived down there. He stepped inside the hut and, going up to the old man who was bending over his work, said, "Good morning, neighbour." The grandfather looked up in surprise and then, rising, said, "Good morning," in return. He pushed his chair towards the visitor as he continued, "If you do not mind a wooden seat, there is one for you." The pastor sat down. "It is a long time since I have seen you, neighbour," he said. "I think you know already what it is that has brought me here." And as he spoke, he looked toward the child who was standing at the door. "Heidi, go off to the goats," said her grandfather. "You can take them a little salt and stay with them till I come." Heidi vanished on the spot. "The child ought to have been at school a year ago, and most certainly this last winter," said the pastor. "The schoolmaster sent you word about it, but you gave him no answer. What are you thinking of doing with the child, neighbour?" "I am thinking of not sending her to school," was the answer. "How are you going to let her grow up, then?" "I am going to let her grow up and be happy among the goats and birds. With them she is safe and will learn nothing of evil." "But the child is not a goat or a bird. She is a human being. It is time she began her lessons. This is the last summer she must be allowed to run wild. Next winter she must come regularly to school every day." "She will do no such thing," said the old man with calm determination. "Do you mean you intend to stick obstinately to your decision?" said the pastor, growing somewhat angry. "You have been about the world, and I should have given you credit for more sense, neighbour." "Indeed," replied the old man. "Could you expect me to send a young child down the mountain on ice-cold mornings, through storm and snow, and let her return at night when the wind is raging? Have you forgotten the child's mother, Adelaide? She was a sleepwalker and had fits. Might not the child be attacked in the same way if obliged to overexert herself? And you think you can come and force me to send her? I will go before all the courts of justice in the country, and then we shall see who will force me to do it." "Perhaps you are right, neighbour," said the pastor, in a friendly tone of voice. "If it is impossible to send the child to school from here, come down into Dorfli and live among your fellow men. What sort of a life is it you lead, alone and with bitter thoughts towards God and man?" No, pastor, as going down to Dorfli to live, that is far from my thoughts. The people despise me, and I them. It is therefore best for all of us that we live apart." The visitor had risen and stood holding out his hand to the old man, as he added with renewed earnestness, "I will wager that next winter you will be down amongst us again, and we shall be good neighbours as of old. Promise me that you will come and live with us again and become reconciled to God and man." Uncle gave the pastor his hand and answered him calmly and firmly. Excuse me. "You mean well by me, I know, but I will not send the child to school nor come and live among you." "Then God help you," said the pastor as he left the hut and went down the mountain. Uncle was out of humour. When Heidi said as usual that afternoon, "Can we go down to grandmother now?" he answered, "Not today." He did not speak again the whole day, and the following morning when Heidi again asked the same question, he replied, "We will see." But before the dinner bowls had been cleared away, another visitor arrived. This time it was Detta. She wore a fine feathered hat and a long trailing dress which swept the floor. Sorry, I'm burping. Which swept the floor. It was really long. The grandfather looked her up and down without uttering a word. But Detta was prepared with an exceedingly amiable speech and began at once to praise the looks of the child. Wonder what she's after. She should hardly have known her again, and it was evident that Heidi had been happy and well cared for with her grandfather, but she had just heard of something which would be a lucky chance for her. Some wealthy people in Frankfurt wanted a companion for their only daughter who was an invalid. Heidi was just the sort of child they were looking for, simple-minded and unspoilt. And after Detta had given them a description of Heidi, they had agreed to take her, and no one could tell what good fortune there might not be in store for her, for if these rich people should take a fancy to Heidi— "Have you finished what you have had to say?" broke in Alm Uncle, who had allowed her to talk on uninterruptedly so far. "Ugh!" exclaimed Detta, throwing up her head in disgust. "One would think I had been talking to you about the most ordinary matter. Why, there is not one person in all Portugal who would not thank God if I were to bring them such a piece of news as I am bringing you." "You may take your news to anybody you like. I will have nothing to do with it." Detta leapt up from her seat like a rocket and cried, "If that is all you have to say about it, why then I will give you a bit of my mind. The child is now 8 years old and knows nothing, and you will not let her learn. You will not send her to church or school, as I was told down in Dorfli, and she is my own sister's child. I am responsible for what happens to her, and this is a good opening for her. I have everybody in Dorfli on my side. There is not one person there who will not take my part against you, and I advise you to think well before bringing it into court, if that is your intention. There are certain things which might be brought up against you that you would not care to hear, for when one has to do with law courts, there is a great deal raked up that had been forgotten." Oh, that's a bit of a threat. "Be silent," thundered the uncle, and his eyes flashed with anger. "Go and be done with you, and never let me see you again with your hat and feather." And with that he strode out of the hut. "You have made grandfather angry," said Heidi, and her dark eyes had anything but a friendly expression in them as she looked at Detta. "He will soon be all right again. Come now," said Detta hurriedly, "and show me where your clothes are." "I am not coming," said Heidi. "Come, come, you will have all sorts of good things that you have never dreamed of." Then she went to the cupboard and, taking out Heidi's things, rolled them up in a bundle. "Come along now. There's your hat. It is very shabby, but will do for the present. Put it on, and let us make haste off." "I am not coming," replied Heidi. "Don't be stupid and obstinate like a goat. I suppose it's from the goats you have learned to be so. Listen to me. You saw your grandfather was angry and heard what he said, that he will not wish to ever see us again. He wants you to go away with me, and you must not make him angrier still. You can't think how nice it is at Frankfurt, and if you do not like it, you can come back again. Your grandfather will be in a good humour by that time." "Can I return at once and be back home again here this evening?" asked Heidi. "What are you talking about? Come along now. I tell you that you can come back here when you like. Today we shall go as far as Mayenfeld, and early tomorrow we shall start in the train. It will bring you home again in no time when you wish it, for it goes as fast as the wind." And I'm going to interrupt here to find the picture. Not that one. So that one was the one from the intro of the book, and that one was the one when she was going up to meet grandfather and she was taking off all the extra layers of clothes. And that one was when she was up having lunch with Peter, up with the goats. And this one is when they were making her new bed. And let's find the others, shall we? I do have them here. I really was trying to get this all sorted out in time. And here's the one where grandfather is taking her down to visit Peter's grandmother. Peter the goat herder. Yes, that's the one. I'll just put that in the right folder so I can find it at the right time next time. And we'll find the next picture, which is the one which is where we're up to in the story, which is nearly there. this one here, where Detta is wanting to have her come with her down to Frankfurt. You can see under Detta's arm, she's got the bundle over there in line with my finger because my hand can't go in front of that picture. So you've got Heidi standing here being defiant and Detta with her big hat with the feathers on it, and under her arm is the bundle of Heidi's current clothes that she has. Okay, and so I shall put that one in the folder too. And I'll just have a quick look, if you don't mind, and see if there's any others that are specific to today's story. I'm pretty sure there is, but we will put that in there when we need it. Okay, we'll carry on now. So they started down the mountain, and as they neared the grandmother's hut, they met Peter coming round the corner carrying an immense bundle of long, thick hazel sticks on his shoulders. He stood still and stared at the two approaching figures as they came up to him. He exclaimed, "Where are you going, Heidi?" "I am only just going over to Frankfurt for a little visit with Detta," she replied, "but I must first run in to grandmother. She will be expecting me." No, you must not stop to talk. It is already too late," said Detta, holding Heidi, who was struggling to get away. "You can go in when you come back," and she pulled the child on with her. Peter ran into the hut and banged against the table with his bundle of sticks with such violence that everything in the room shook, and his grandmother leapt up with a cry of alarm from her spinning wheel. "What is the matter? What is the matter?" cried the frightened old woman. "She's taking Heidi away," exclaimed Peter. Who? Where to, Peter? Where to?" asked the grandmother, growing still more agitated. Remember, she's blind, so she can't actually see the additional things that are going on by looking out the window or anything. But even as she spoke, she guessed what had happened, for Brigitte had told her shortly before that she had seen Detta going up to Alma Uncle. The old woman opened the window and called out beseechingly, Detta, do not take the child away from us. Do not take her away." The two who were hastening down the mountain heard her voice, and Detta evidently caught the words, for she grasped Heidi's hand more firmly. Heidi struggled to get free, crying, "Grandmother is calling. I must go to her." But Detta had no intention of letting the child go, and quieted her as best she could by promising that she could take something nice back to grandmother. This was a new idea to Heidi, and it pleased her so much that Detta had no longer any difficulty in getting her along. "What could I take back to her?" Heidi asked. "A soft roll of white bread. She would enjoy that." "For now she is old, she can hardly eat the hard black bread," answered Detta. Black bread. Often it's made with rye or some of the other more easily grown grains for their climate, up the mountain, a short growing season, that sort of thing. Whole grain, whole meal, which means that when it's ground, it's still got all the bran in it and everything like that. A little bit of hard work chewing it, definitely. If you're in New Zealand, it would be similar to Vogels, but even harder, without the nice soft bits in between the grains and Vogels. "Yes, she always gives it back to Peter, telling him it's too hard," affirmed Heidi. "Do let us make haste, for then perhaps we can get back soon from Frankfurt, and I shall be able to give her the white bread today." And Heidi started off running so fast that Detta, with the bundle under her arm, could scarcely keep up with her. And that's a pause in the writing. From that day forward, Alma Uncle looked fiercer and more forbidding than ever when he came down and passed through Dorfli. He spoke to no one and looked such an ogre as he came along with his pack of cheeses on his back, his immense stick in his hand, and his thick frowning eyebrows, that the women would call to their little ones, "Take care, get out of Alma Uncle's way, or he may hurt you." Oh dear, that's a little bit of a misrepresentation. It's the adults who are a problem, not the children. The old man took no notice of anybody as he strode through the village on his way to the valley below, where he sold his cheeses and bought what bread and meat he wanted for himself. After he had passed, the villagers all crowded together looking after him. They agreed that it was a great mercy the child had got away from him. not realizing that he had become a lot softer when the child was there. The reason he was so harsh now was because the child was gone. Nope, they don't want to see it. Only the blind grandmother would have nothing to say against him, and told those who came to bring her work how kind and thoughtful he had been with the child, how good to her and her daughter, and how many afternoons he had spent mending the house. All this was repeated down in Dorfley, but most of the people who heard it said that grandmother was too old to understand, and very likely had not heard rightly what was said, as she was blind. Probably she was also deaf. So people had decided in their minds how to interpret his behaviour. Not good. And I'm going to pause there because that is the end of that chapter. There you go. Time to have something to drink. Go on, so you don't get dehydrated. I'm looking across at these pictures in the folder here, thinking, how many more have I got? Oh well, I'll do the rest some other time, or put them in as we need them if there are any more today. We shall carry on. Hang on a minute. I'm just going to. Heidi by Johanna, Spyri, Chapter 6, Clara, the patient little invalid. In her home in Frankfurt, Clara, the little daughter of Mr. Sesemann, was lying on the invalid couch on which she spent her whole day, being wheeled in it from room to room. Her little face was pale and thin, and at this moment she set her two soft blue eyes were fixed on the clock, which seemed to her to go very slowly this day, and with a slight accent of impatience, which was very rare in her, she asked, "Isn't it time yet, Miss Rottenmeier?" This lady was sitting very upright at a small work table, busy with her embroidery. She wore a dome-shaped headpiece which made her look very solemn and dignified. For many years past, since Clara's mother had died, the housekeeping and the superintendence of the servants had been entrusted to Miss Rottenmeier. The father, who was often away from home, left her in sole charge, with the condition only that his little daughter should have a voice in all matters, and that nothing should be done against her wish. As Clara was putting her impatient question for the second time, Detta and Heidi arrived at the front door. Tinette, the maid in dainty cap and apron, ushered them upstairs into the library. Detta remained standing politely near the door, still holding Heidi tightly by the hand, for she did not know what the child might take into her head to do amid these new surroundings. Miss Rottenmeier rose slowly and went up to the new little companion for the daughter of the house, to see what she was like. She did not seem very pleased with her appearance. Heidi was dressed in her plain little woolen frock, and her hat was an old straw one, bent out of shape. The child looked innocently out from beneath it, gazing with unconcealed astonishment at the lady's towering headdress. "What is your name?" asked Miss Rottenmeier, after examining the child for some minutes, while Heidi in return kept her eyes steadily fixed upon the lady. "Heidi," she answered in a clear, ringing voice. What? That's no Christian name for a child. You were not christened that. What name did they give you when you were baptized?" continued Miss Rottenmeier. Obviously has some very strong opinions about what was appropriate and what wasn't. I don't know why she thinks she's the arbiter of what's appropriate. "I do not remember," replied Heidi. "What a way to answer," said the lady, shaking her head. "Detta, is the child a simpleton or only saucy?" "If the lady will allow me, I will speak for the child, for she is very unaccustomed to strangers," said Detta, who had given Heidi a silent poke for making such an unsuitable answer. She is certainly not stupid nor yet saucy. She speaks exactly what she thinks. This is the first time she has ever been in a gentleman's house, and she does not know good manners, but she is very willing to learn. She was christened Adelaide after her mother, my sister, who is now dead. Well, that's a name that one can pronounce, remarked Miss Rottenmeier, but I must tell you, Detta, that I am astonished to see so young a child. I told you that I wanted a companion of the same age as the young lady of the house, one who could share her lessons and all her other occupations. Miss Clara is now over 12. What age is this child? If the lady will allow me, began Detta again in her usual fluent manner. She's obviously used to using nice titles and things like this to flatter people, to help to soften the way her words go, to get what she's after, I would think. If the lady will allow me, began Detta again in her usual fluent manner, I myself had lost count of her exact age. She is certainly a little younger, but not much. I cannot say precisely, but I think she is 10 or thereabouts. Oh, naughty Detta. She's lying. Grandfather told me I was 8, put in Heidi. Detta gave her another poke, but as the child had not the least idea why she did so, she was not at all confused by the fact that she'd said that and then been poked. What? Only 8? Cried Miss Rottenmeier angrily. 4 years too young. Of what use is such a child? And what have you learnt? What books did you have to learn from? None, said Heidi. How? What? How then did you learn to read? Continued the lady. I have never learnt to read, or Peter either, Heidi informed her. Mercy upon us, you do not know how to read. Is it really so? Exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier, greatly horrified. Is it possible? Not able to read? What have you learned then? Nothing, said Heidi with unflinching truthfulness. Young woman, said the lady to Detta, this is not at all the sort of companion we want. How could you think of bringing me a child like this? But Detta would not be put down so easily, and answered warmly, If you will allow me, the child is exactly what I thought you required. She is unlike all other children, and I thought this child seemed as if made for the place. But I must go now, for my mistress will be waiting for me. If you will permit, I will come again soon and see how she is getting on. And with a bow, Detta quickly left the room and ran downstairs. Miss Rottenmeier stood for a moment, taken aback, and then ran after Detta, but she had disappeared out the front door. Heidi remained where she had been standing since she first came in. Clara had looked on during the interview without speaking. Now she beckoned to Heidi and said, Come here. Heidi went up to her. Would you rather be called Heidi or Adelaide? asked Clara. I am never called anything but Heidi, was the child's prompt answer. Then I shall always call you by that name, said Clara. It suits you. I have never heard it before, but neither have I ever seen a child like you before. Have you always had that short curly hair? Yes, I think so, said Heidi. Are you pleased to come to Frankfurt? Went on Clara. No, but I shall go home again tomorrow and take grandmother a white loaf, explained Heidi. Well, you are a funny child, said Clara. Don't you know you were sent for to come here and stay with me and share my lessons? They are dreadfully dull, and I think the morning will never pass away. My tutor comes every morning at about 10 o'clock, and then we go on with lessons till 2, and it does seem such a long time. Sometimes he takes up the book and holds it close up to his face, as if he were very short-sighted, but I know it's only because he wants to gape, and Miss Rottenmeier takes her large handkerchief out also now and then, and covers her face with it, as if she was moved by what we had been reading, but it is only because she is longing to gape too. I think by gape she may mean yawn, I'm not sure. And I myself often want to gape, but I dare not, for if Miss Rottenmeier sees me gaping, she runs off at once and fetches the cod-liver oil and says that I must have a dose, as I am getting weak again, and the cod-liver oil is horrible. But now it will be much more amusing, for I shall be able to lie back and listen to you while you learn to read. I'm pretty certain that gape means yawn from the context. Heidi shook her head doubtfully when she heard of learning to read. Oh, nonsense, Heidi. Of course you must learn to read. Everybody must. And my tutor is very kind and never cross, and he will explain everything to you. But mind, when he explains anything to you, you won't be able to understand. But don't ask any questions, or else he will go on explaining and you will understand less than ever. Oh dear, not really the best sort of tutor. Later, when you have learned more and know about things yourself, then you'll begin to understand what he meant. Miss Rottenmeier now came back into the room. She had not been able to overtake Detta and was evidently very much put out. She walked backwards and forwards in a state of agitation between the study and the dining room and began scolding the butler. "Make haste, Sebastian, or we shall get no dinner today at all," she said. Then hurrying out, she called to Tinette to see that the bedroom was prepared for the little girl who had just arrived. Meanwhile, Sebastian had flung open the folding doors leading to the dining room with rather more noise than he needed, for he was feeling cross, although he did not dare answer back when Miss Rottenmeier spoke to him. He went up to Clara's chair to wheel her into the next room. Heidi stood staring at him. Seeing her eyes fixed upon him, he suddenly growled out, "Well, what is there in me to stare at like that?" Which he would certainly not have done if he had been aware that Miss Rottenmeier had just then entered the room. "You look so like Peter," answered Heidi. The housekeeper clasped her hands in horror. "Is it possible," she stammered half aloud, "that she is now addressing the servant as if he were a friend? I never could have imagined such a child." Sebastian wheeled the couch into the dining room and helped Clara onto her chair. Miss Rottenmeier took the seat beside her and made a sign to Heidi to take the one opposite. Beside Heidi's plate lay a nice white roll, and her eyes lighted up with pleasure as she saw it. When Sebastian came up to her side and handed her the dish of fish, she looked at the roll and asked, "Can I have it?" Sebastian nodded, and Heidi immediately seized the roll and put it in her pocket. Sebastian still remained standing beside Heidi. It was not his duty to speak, nor to move away, until she had helped herself. Heidi looked wonderingly at him for a minute or two, and then said, "Am I to eat some of that too?" Sebastian nodded again. "Give me some then," she said, looking calmly at her plate. "I see I shall have to teach you the first rules of behaviour," said the housekeeper with a sigh. "You must not speak to Sebastian at table or at any other time unless you have an order to give him. And then you are not to address him as if he was someone belonging to you. Never let me hear you speak to him in that way again. It is the same with Tinette, and for myself you are to address me as you hear others doing. Clara must herself decide what you are to call her." "Why, Clara, of course," put in the latter. Then followed a long list of rules. Sorry. I breathed wrong. It is possible to do. Then followed a long list of rules as to general behaviour, during the course of which Heidi's eyes gradually closed, for she had been up before 5 o'clock that morning and had had a long journey. She leaned back in her chair and fell fast asleep. Miss Rottenmeier, having at last come to the end of her lecture, said, "Now remember what I have said, Adelaide. Do you understand it all?" "Heidi has been asleep for ever so long," said Clara, her face rippling all over with amusement, for she had not had such an entertaining dinner for a long time. "It is really insupportable what one has to go through with this child," exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier in great indignation, and she rang the bell so violently that Tinette and Sebastian both came running in, but with no noise sufficient to wake Heidi, and it was with difficulty that they roused her sufficiently to get her to her room. And that's the end of that chapter, so I better have a drink of water because the back of my throat's now tickly. What a laugh. Oh my goodness. I think we're going to have a clash of wills here, don't you? Heidi, who knows what she likes and what she doesn't like and how she wants to do things, and Mrs. Rottenmeier, who seems to have a very strong opinion about how things ought to be. Oh Oh dear. Who's going to come out on top in the long run? It's a challenge. Might keep Clara amused though. Oh dear. Right, we shall carry on. Hi, I'm Jev, and I'm reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and we're reading Chapter 7, The Unfriendly Housekeeper. When Heidi opened her eyes on her first morning in Frankfurt, she could not think where she was, so she must have slept from the time she was at the dining table all the way through. She could not think where she was. Then she rubbed her eyes, and looked about her. She was sitting up in a high white bed, in a large, wide room with very long white curtains. Near the window stood 2 chairs covered with large flowered material, and then came a sofa with the same flowers, in front of which was a round table. In the corner was a washstand with things upon it that Heidi had never seen before in her life. But now all at once she remembered that she was in Frankfurt. She jumped out of bed and dressed herself. Then she ran first to one window and then another. She wanted to see the sky and country outside. She felt like a bird in a cage behind those great curtains. But they were too heavy for her to put aside, so she crept underneath them to get to the window. But she could see nothing but walls and windows. She felt quite frightened and ran backwards and forwards, trying to open first one and then the other of the windows, for she felt that somewhere outside there must be the green grass and the last unmelted snows on the mountain slopes. But the windows remained immovable, try what Heidi would to open them. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, and immediately after, Tinette put her head inside and said, "Breakfast is ready." Heidi had no idea what an invitation so worded meant, and Tinette's face did not encourage any questioning on Heidi's part. Heidi was sharp enough to read its expression and acted accordingly. So she drew a little stool out from under the table, put it in the corner, and sat down upon it, and there silently awaited what would happen next. Because something will happen. Shortly after, Miss Rottenmeier appeared. She seemed very much put out and called to Heidi, "What is the matter with you, Adelaide? Don't you understand what breakfast is? Come along at once." Heidi had no difficulty in understanding now and followed her at once. Clara gave her a kindly greeting, her face looking considerably more cheerful than usual, for she looked forward to all kinds of new things happening again that day. Breakfast passed off quietly. Heidi ate her bread and butter in a perfectly correct manner, and when the meal was over and Clara wheeled back into the study, Miss Rottenmeier told her to follow and remain with Clara until the tutor should arrive and lessons begin. As soon as the children were alone again, Heidi asked, "How can one see out from here and look right down to the ground?" "You must open the window and look out," replied Clara, amused. "But the windows won't open," responded Heidi sadly. "Yes, they will," Clara assured her. "You cannot open them, nor I either, but when you see Sebastian, you can ask him to open one." It was a great relief to Heidi to know that the windows could be opened and that one could look out. Clara now began to ask her questions about her home, and Heidi was delighted to tell her all about the mountain and the goats and the flowery meadows. Meanwhile, her tutor had arrived. Miss Rottenmeier, however, did not bring him straight into the study, but drew him first aside into the dining room, where she poured forth her troubles. It appeared that she had written some time back to Mr. Sesemann to tell him that his daughter very much desired to have a companion. Miss Rottenmeier had wished for this arrangement on her own behalf, as it would relieve her from having always to entertain the sick girl. The father had answered that he was quite willing to let his daughter have a companion, provided she was treated in every way like his own child. But now she went on to explain how dreadfully she had been taken in about the child, and related all the unimaginable things of which she had already been guilty, so that not only would he have to begin with teaching her the ABC, but would have to start with the most rudimentary instruction as regarding everything to do with daily life. She could see only one way out of this disastrous state of affairs, and that was for the tutor to declare that it was impossible for the two to learn together without detriment to Clara, who was so far ahead of the other. That would be a good excuse for getting rid of the child. But she dared not send her home without Mr. Sesemann's order, since he was aware that by this time the companion had arrived. The tutor was a cautious man, and said that if the little girl was backward in some things, she was probably advanced in others, and a little regular teaching would soon set the balance right. When Miss Rottenmeier saw that he was not ready to support her, and evidently quite ready to undertake teaching the alphabet, she opened the study door, which she quickly shut again as soon as he had gone through, remaining on the other side herself, for she had a perfect horror of the ABC. She walked up and down the dining room, thinking over in her own mind how the servants were to be told to address Adelaide. The father had written that she was to be treated exactly like his own daughter, and this would especially refer, she imagined, to the servants. She was not allowed, however, a very long interval of time for consideration, for suddenly the sound of a frightful crash was heard in the study, followed by frantic cries for Sebastian. She rushed into the room. There on the floor lay in a confused heap books, exercise books, and inkstand, with the tablecloth on top, while from beneath them a dark stream of ink was flowing all across the floor. Heidi had disappeared. "Here's a state of things," exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier. "Tablecloth, books, work-basket, everything lying in the ink. It was that unfortunate child, I suppose." "Yes, Heidi did it," explained Clara, "but quite by accident. She must on no account be punished. She jumped up in such a violent haste to get away that she dragged the tablecloth along with her, and so everything went over. There were a number of vehicles passing. Is why she rushed off like that. Perhaps she has never seen a carriage." "Is it not as I said? She has not the smallest notion about anything. But where is the child who has caused all this trouble? Surely she has not run away. What would Mr. Sesemann say to me?" She ran out of the room and down the stairs. There at the bottom, standing in the open doorway, was Heidi, looking in amazement up and down the street. "What are you doing? What are you thinking of to run away like that?" called Miss Rottenmeier. "I heard the sound of the fir trees, but I cannot see where they are, and now I cannot hear them any more," answered Heidi, looking disappointedly in the direction whence the noise of the passing carriages had reached her, and which to Heidi had seemed like the blowing of the south wind in the trees, so that in great joy of heart she had rushed out to look at them. "Fir trees? Do you suppose we are in the woods? What ridiculous ideas are these? Come upstairs and see the mischief you have done." Heidi followed Miss Rottenmeier upstairs. She was quite astonished to see the disaster she had caused, for in her joy and haste to get to the fir trees, she had been unaware of having dragged everything after her. "I excuse you doing this as it is the first time, but do not let me hear of you doing it a second time," said Miss Rottenmeier, pointing to the floor. "During your lesson time you are to sit still and attend. If you cannot do this, I shall have to tie you to your chair. Do you understand?" "Yes," replied Heidi, "but I will certainly not move again," for now she understood that it was a rule to sit still while she was being taught. When Clara had been placed on her couch after dinner, and the housekeeper had retired to her room, Heidi waited for Sebastian, who was coming up from the kitchen with a tray of silver tea things, which he had to put away in the dining-room cupboard. As he reached the top stair, Heidi went up to him and addressed him in the formal manner she had been ordered to use by Miss Rottenmeier. Sebastian looked surprised and said somewhat curtly, "What is it you want, miss?" "How can a window be opened?" "Why, like that." And Sebastian flung up one of the large windows. Heidi ran to it, but she was not tall enough to see out, for her head only reached the sill. There, now miss can look out and see what is going on below," said Sebastian as he brought her a high wooden stool to stand on. Heidi climbed up and at last, as she thought, was going to see what she had been longing for, but she drew back her head with a look of great disappointment on her face. Why, there's nothing outside but the stony streets, she said mournfully. But if I went right round to the other side of the house, what should I see there, Sebastian? Nothing but what you see here, he told her. I'm just going to show you the illustration in this book, which is done by a different author, and I don't have it set up on my computer. So there you've got Sebastian standing, holding the curtain to one side, and Heidi is standing on the stool that he has brought over for her so that she can look out the window. Because he obviously understood that that was what she was trying to do. I think he's not used to someone quite as direct and simple in lifestyle as she is, like anybody else in the house. Nothing but what you can see here, he told her. Then where can I go to see right away over the whole valley? You would have to climb to the top of a high tower, a church tower like that one over there with a gold ball above it. Heidi got down quickly from her stool, ran to the door, down the steps and out into the street. She passed a great many people, but they all seemed in such a hurry that Heidi thought they had not time to tell her which way to go. Then suddenly at one of the street corners she saw a boy carrying a hand organ on his back and a funny-looking animal on his arm. Heidi ran up to him and said, Where is the tower with the gold ball on the top? I don't know, came the answer. Do you know any other church with a high tower? Yes, I know one. Come then, and show me. Show me first what you will give me, and the boy held out his hand as he spoke. Heidi searched about in her pocket, and presently drew out a card on which was painted a garland of beautiful red roses. She looked at it first for a moment or two, for she felt rather sorry to part with it. Clara had only that morning made her a present of it, but then to look down into the valley and see all the lovely green slopes. There, said Heidi, holding out the card. Would you like to have that? The boy drew back his hand and shook his head. What would you like then? Asked Heidi, not sorry to put the card back in her pocket. Money. I have none, but Clara has. I'm sure she will give me some. How much do you want? 5 cents. Come along then. They started off together along the street, and on the way Heidi asked her companion what he was carrying on his back. And I'm just going to have a quick look at a picture here on my computer, which I haven't got available for you. Yes, that's the one. Unfortunately, I can't do drag and drop for this. So I just have to go add. I'm going to add a picture so you can see. And it is that one. There you go. I'll move it down here so that those who are watching over on YouTube a bit later on will be able to see it. And so she's running along the street. They're running along the street. There's the boy. He's got a box under his arm which has got a strap on it. That's his little organ. And he's got an animal under his arm. Not sure. I can't tell from the size here. Maybe it's a turtle. And there's Heidi running alongside him. So they started off together along the street, and on the way Heidi asked her companion what he was carrying on his back. It was a hand organ, he told her, which played beautiful music when he turned the handle. All at once they found themselves in front of an old church with a high tower. The boy said, There it is. Heidi caught sight. Sorry, I'll just put this in the right place and then turn it off for now. Heidi caught sight of a bell in the wall, which she now pulled with all her might. If I go up to the tower, you must wait here, for I do not know the way back, and you will have to show me. What will you give me for that? Another 5 cents. I don't know if Heidi has any idea about money whatsoever. Probably not. They heard the key turning inside, and then someone pulled open the heavy, creaking door. An old man came out, and at first looked with surprise and then in anger at the children as he began scolding them. What do you mean by ringing me down like this? Can't you read what is written over the bell for those who wish to go up the tower? But I do want to go up the tower, said Heidi. What do you want up there? Said the old man. Has somebody sent you? No, replied Heidi. I only want to go up and look down on the valley. Get along home with you and don't try this trick again, or you may not come off so easily a second time. and with that he turned and was about to shut the door. But Heidi took hold of his coat and said beseechingly, "Let me go up, just once." He looked round, and his mood changed as he saw her pleading eyes. He took hold of her hand and said kindly, "Well, if you really wish it so much, I will take you." The boy sat down on the church steps to show that he was content to wait where he was. When they had climbed to the top of the tower, the old man lifted Heidi up that she might look out of the open window. She saw beneath them a sea of roofs, towers, chimney pots. She quickly drew back her head and said in a sad, disappointed voice, "It's not at all what I thought. You see now, a child like you does not understand anything about a view. Come along down and don't go ringing at my bell again." On the way down, they passed the tower keeper's room. At the far end of this was a large basket, in front of which sat a big grey cat. Heidi went up to the basket and broke out into expressions of delight. "Oh, the sweet little things, the darling kittens," she kept on saying as she jumped from side to side of the basket so as not to lose any of the droll gambols of the 7 or 8 little kittens that were scrambling and rolling and falling over one another. "Would you like to have one?" said the old man, who enjoyed watching the child's pleasure. "For myself? To keep?" said Heidi excitedly, who could hardly believe such happiness was to be hers. "Yes, of course, more than one if you like. In short, you can take away the whole lot if you have room for them." The old man was only too glad to think he could get rid of his kittens without any more trouble. "But how can I take them with me?" asked Heidi, and was going quickly to see how many she could carry away in her hands when the old cat sprang at her so fiercely that she shrank back in fear. "I will take them for you if you tell me where," said the old man, stroking the cat to quiet her. "To Mr. Sesemann's, the big house where there is a gold dog's head on the door with a ring in its mouth," explained Heidi. The old man had had charge of the tower for many a long year and knew every house far and near. "I know the house," he said, "but when shall I bring them, and who shall I ask for? You are not one of the family, I am sure." "No, but Clara will be so delighted when I take her the kittens." "If I could just take 1 or 2 away with me, one for myself and one for Clara, may I?" "Well, wait a moment," said the man, and he drew the cat cautiously away into his room, and leaving her by a bowl of milk, came out again and shut the door. "Now, take 2 of them." Heidi's eyes shone with delight. She picked up a white kitten and another striped white and yellow, and put one in the right, the other in the left pocket. Then she went downstairs. The boy was still sitting outside on the steps. In a very short time, they had reached the door with the large... That's probably actually where that illustration's from. It looks like, I'm not sure if you can see it, she's holding on to her pockets, which makes sense now. She's holding them onto the pockets so the kittens stay in. In a very short time they had reached the door with a large dog's head for a knocker. Heidi rang the bell. Sebastian opened it quickly, and when he saw it was Heidi, "Make haste, make haste," he cried in a hurried voice. Heidi sprang hastily in, and Sebastian shut the door after her, leaving the boy, whom he had not noticed, standing in wonder on the steps. "Make haste, little miss," said Sebastian again. "Go straight into the dining room. They are already at table. Miss Rottenmeier looks like a loaded cannon. What could make the little miss run off like that?" Heidi walked into the room. The housekeeper did not look up. Clara did not speak. There was an uncomfortable silence. Sebastian pushed her chair up for her, and when she was seated, Miss Rottenmeier said sternly, "Adelaide, you have behaved in a most unmannerly way by running out of the house as you did, without asking permission, without anyone knowing a word about it, and then to go wandering about till this hour. I have never heard of such behaviour before." "Meow," came the answer back. This was too much for the lady's temper. With raised voice she exclaimed, "You dare, Adelaide, after your bad behaviour, to answer me as if it were a joke." "I did not," began Heidi. "Meow, meow." "That will do," Miss Rottenmeier tried to say, but her voice was almost stifled with anger. "Get up and leave the room." Heidi stood up, frightened, and again made an attempt to explain. "I really did not." "Meow, meow, meow." "But Heidi," now put in Clara, "when you see that it makes Miss Rottenmeier angry, why do you keep on saying meow?" It isn't I, it's the kittens, Heidi was at last given time to say. How? What? Kittens? Shrieked Miss Rottenmeier. Sebastian, Tinette, find the horrid little things, take them away. And she rose and fled into the study and locked the door. When Sebastian entered the dining room, Clara had the kittens on her lap, and Heidi was kneeling beside her, both laughing and playing with the tiny, graceful little animals. Sebastian, exclaimed Clara as he came in, you must help us. You must find a bed for the kittens where Miss Rottenmeier will not spy them out, for she is so afraid of them that she will send them away at once, but we want to keep them, and to have them out whenever we are alone. Where can you put them? I will see to that, answered Sebastian willingly. I will make a bed in a basket and put it in some place where the lady is not likely to go. You leave it to me. He set about the work at once, sniggering to himself the while, for he guessed there would be a further rumpus about this some day. And Sebastian was not without a certain pleasure in the thought of Miss Rottenmeier being a little disturbed. After some time had elapsed, Miss Rottenmeier opened the door a crack and called through, Have you taken those dreadful little animals away, Sebastian? He assured her twice that he had done so, and quickly and quietly catching up the kittens from Clara's lap, disappeared with them. Miss Rottenmeier retired without speaking, Clara and Heidi following, happy in their minds at knowing that the kittens were lying in a comfortable bed. And that's the end of that chapter. So I'm going to have another drink. And we are going to have at least one more chapter. That's better. Oops, I'm just going to run downstairs and turn on the oven. I need to. So I'm going to mute this. No, I'm not. I'm going to let you listen to the birds. I'll be back in a minute. I'm just turning on the oven for my dinner. noisy chair. Right, here we go. So we've got roast lamb for dinner tonight, and I've just turned the oven on for it. So that should be good. After I've finished reading, I'll be peeling potatoes and kumara, which is kumara, how do you explain it? Sweet potato. New Zealand version of sweet potato. Sorry, I'm just noticing something on my overlay which I haven't seen before. No idea what that was. Doesn't matter. Right, we shall carry on. Heidi by Johanna Spyri, or Johanna Spyri. We used to say it when I was a kid. Anyway, there you go. Heidi by Johanna Spyri, Chapter 8, Surprises for the Children. I hope these are good ones, not bad ones. We'll see. See what happens. Right, Chapter 8, Surprises for the Children. The tutor had just been shown into the study on the following morning when there came a very loud ring at the bell. Sebastian opened the door, and there stood a ragged little boy carrying a hand organ on his back. "What is the meaning of this?" said Sebastian angrily. "I'll teach you to ring bells like that. What do you want here?" "I want to see Clara," the little boy answered. "You good-for-nothing little rascal, can't you be polite enough to say Miss Clara? What do you want with her?" continued Sebastian roughly. "She owes me 10 cents, explained the boy. "You must be out of your mind. And how do you know that any young lady of that name lives here? She owes me 5 for showing her the way there and 5 for showing her the way back. The young lady never goes out, cannot even walk. Be off and get back to where you came from before I have to help you along." But the little boy was not frightened away and said in a determined voice, "But I saw her in the street, and I can describe her to you. She was short, curly black hair. She has short, curly black hair and black eyes, and wears a brown dress and does not talk quite like we do." "Oh," thought Sebastian, laughing to himself, "the little miss has evidently been up to more mischief." Then drawing the boy inside, he said aloud, "I understand now. Come with me and wait outside the door till I tell you to go in. Be sure you begin playing your organ the instant you get inside the room, for the lady is very fond of music." "Oh, I can see trouble coming." Sebastian knocked at the study door, and a voice said, "Come in." "There is a boy outside who says he must speak to Miss Clara herself," Sebastian announced. Clara was delighted at such an extraordinary and unexpected message. "Let him come in at once," replied Clara. The boy was already inside the room, and according to Sebastian's directions, immediately began to play his organ. Miss Rottenmeier, hearing the music, rushed into the room and saw the ragged boy turning away at his organ in the most energetic manner. Turning the handle. It's a crank organ. Leave off at once," she screamed, but her voice was drowned by music. She was making a dash for the boy when she saw something on the ground crawling towards her feet, a dreadful, dark object, a tortoise. At this sight she jumped higher than she had for many long years before, shrieking with all her might, "Sebastian! Sebastian!" "Take them all out, boy and animal. Get them away at once," she commanded him. Sebastian pulled the boy away, the latter having quickly caught up his tortoise. I was right, that was what was in the picture. And when he had got him outside, he put something into his hand. "There is the 10 cents from Miss Clara, and another 10 cents for the music. You did it all quite right." And with that, he shut the front door upon him. So Sebastian knew he could have a bit of fun with Miss Rottenmeier. At least he paid him, and he gave him something extra. That was good. Quietness reigned again in the study, and lessons began once more. Miss Rottenmeier now stayed in the study in order to prevent any further goings-on. What a scream. Oh dear, I'm just having a quick look. Oh no, we don't have any more pictures we need to do right at the moment. But soon another knock came to the door, and Sebastian again stepped in, this time to say that someone had brought a large basket with orders that it was to be given at once to Miss Clara. For me? Said Clara in astonishment, her curiosity very much excited. Bring it in at once, that I may see what it is like. Sebastian carried in a large covered basket and retired. I think the lessons had better be finished first before the basket is unpacked, said Miss Rottenmeier. Clara could not conceive what was in it, and cast longing glances towards it. In the middle of one of her declensions, she suddenly broke off and said to the tutor, Mayn't I just give one peep inside to see what is in it before I go on? On some considerations I am for it, on others against it, he began in answer. For it on the ground, that if your whole attention is directed to the basket, not quite sure what he means, but the speech remained unfinished. The cover of the basket was loose, and at this moment 1, 2, 3, and then 2 more kittens came suddenly tumbling out onto the floor and racing about the room in every direction. They jumped over the tutor's boots, climbed up Miss Rottenmeier's dress, rolled about her feet, sprang up onto Clara's couch, scratching and scrambling and mewing. Clara kept on exclaiming, Oh, the dear little things, how pretty they are. Look, Heidi, at this one. Look at that one over there. And Heidi, in her delight, kept running after them, first into one corner and then into the other. The tutor stood up by the table, not knowing what to do. Miss Rottenmeier was unable to speak at all, so overcome was she with horror, and she did not dare rise from her chair for fear that all the dreadful little animals should jump upon her at once. At last she found her voice to call loudly, Tinette! Tinette! Sebastian! Sebastian! They came in answer to her summons, and gathered up the kittens. By degrees they got them all inside the basket again, and then carried them off to be put with the other 2. I'm guessing Tinette is in on it. When Miss Rottenmeier learned that Heidi was to blame for having the kittens brought into the house, she was very angry and said, Adelaide, you little barbarian, you shall be put into a dark cellar with the rats and black beetles. Heidi listened in silence and surprise to her sentence, for she had never seen a cellar such as was now described. The place known at her grandfather's as the cellar, where the fresh cheeses and new milk were kept, was a pleasant and inviting place. Neither did she know at all what rats and black beetles were like. But now Clara interrupted in great distress. No, Miss Rottenmeier, you must wait till Papa comes. He has written to say that he will soon be home, and then I will tell him everything, and he will say what is to be done with Heidi. Miss Rottenmeier could not do anything against this superior authority, especially as the father was really expected very shortly. She rose and said with some displeasure, As you will, Clara, but I too shall have something to say to Mr. Sesemann. And with that she left the room. 2 days now went by without further disturbance. Miss Rottenmeier, however, could not recover her equanimity. She was perpetually reminded by Heidi's presence of the deception that had been played upon her, and it seemed to her that ever since the child had come into the house, everything had been topsy-turvy, and she could not bring things into proper order again. Clara had grown much more cheerful. She no longer found time hang heavy during the lesson hours, for Heidi was continually making a diversion of some kind or another. She jumbled all her letters up together and seemed quite unable to learn them, and when the tutor tried to draw her attention to their different shapes, and to help her by showing her that this was like a little horn or that like a bird's bill, she would suddenly exclaim in a joyful voice, That is a goat! That is a bird of prey! For the tutor's descriptions suggested all kinds of pictures in her mind, but left her still incapable of the alphabet. In their later afternoons, Heidi always sat with Clara and told her of the mountain and of her life upon it. And the longing to return would become so overpowering that she always finished with the words, Now I must go home. Tomorrow I must really go. But Clara would try to quiet her and tell Heidi that she must wait till her father returned, and then they would see what was to be done. After dinner, Heidi had to sit alone in her room for a couple of hours, for she understood now that she might not run about outside at Frankfurt as she did on the mountain, and so she did not attempt it. At times she could hardly contain herself for the longing to be back home. She remembered that Detta had told her that she could go home whenever she liked. So it came about one day that Heidi felt she could not bear it any longer. She tied all the rolls up in her red shawl, put on her straw hat, and went downstairs. But just as she reached the hall door, she met Miss Rottenmeier just returning from a walk, which put a stop to Heidi's journey. "What have you dressed yourself like that for?" exclaimed Miss Rottenmeier. "What do you mean by this? Have I not strictly forbidden you to go running about in the streets? And here you are ready to start off again and going out looking like a beggar." "I was not going to run about. I was going home," said Heidi, frightened. "What are you talking about, going home? What would Mr. Sesemann say if he knew? And what is the matter with his house, I should like to know? Have you ever in your life before had such a house to live in, such a table, or so many to wait upon you? Have you?" "No," replied Heidi. "I should think not indeed," continued the exasperated lady. "You are an ungrateful little thing, to be always thinking of what naughty things you can do next." Then Heidi's feelings got the better of her, and she poured forth her trouble. "Indeed, I only want to go home, for if I stay so long away, Snowflake will begin crying again, and grandmother is waiting for me, and Greenfinch will get beaten because I am not there to give Peter any cheese, and I can never hear how the sun says good night to the mountains, and if the great bird were to fly over Frankfurt, he would croak louder than ever about people huddling all together and teaching each other bad things and not going to live up on the rocks where it is so much better." "Heaven have mercy on us! The child is out of her mind," cried Miss Rottenmeier, and she turned and went quickly up the steps. "Go and bring that unhappy little creature in at once," she ordered Sebastian. "What, are you in trouble again?" said Sebastian in a pleasant voice as he led Heidi back up the stairs. He tried to cheer her up by telling her he was taking good care of all the kittens, but she was too sad to care, and silently crept away to her room. At supper that evening she sat without moving or eating. All she did was to hastily hide her roll in her pocket. Next day Miss Rottenmeier made up her mind that she would supplement Heidi's clothing with various garments from Clara's wardrobe, so as to give her a decent appearance when Mr. Sesemann returned. Trying to impress again. She confided her intention to Clara, who was quite willing to give up any number of dresses and hats to Heidi, so the lady went upstairs to overhaul the child's belongings and see what was to be kept and what thrown away. She returned, however, in the course of a few minutes with an expression of horror upon her face. "What is this, Adelaide, that I find in your wardrobe?" she exclaimed. "I never heard of anyone doing such a thing before. In a cupboard meant for clothes, Adelaide, what do I see at the bottom but a heap of rolls? Will you believe it, Clara? Bread in a wardrobe, a whole pile of bread." "Tinette," she called, "go upstairs and take away all those rolls out of Adelaide's cupboard and the old straw hat on the table." "No, no," screamed Heidi, "I must keep the hat, and the rolls are for grandmother," and she was rushing to stop Tinette when Miss Rottenmeier caught hold of her. "You will stop here, and all that bread and rubbish shall be taken to the place they belong to," she said in a determined tone as she kept her hand on the child to prevent her running forward. Heidi flung herself down on Clara's couch and broke into a wild fit of weeping, sobbing out at intervals, "Now grandmother's bread is all gone. They were all for grandmother, and now they are taken away and grandmother won't have one," and she wept as if her heart would break. She could not get over her sobs for a long time. She would never have been able to leave off crying at all if it had not been for Clara's promise that she should have fresh, new rolls to take to grandmother when the time came for her to go home. When Heidi got into bed that night, she found her old straw hat lying under the counterpane. That's like the bedspread. She snatched it up with delight, made it more out of shape still in her joy, and then, after wrapping a handkerchief around it, she stuck it in a corner of the cupboard as far back as she could. So obviously Sebastian or Tinette had hidden it for her because they knew it meant a lot to her. It was... Here I go again, explaining before I need to. It was Sebastian who had hidden it there for her. He had been in the dining room when Tinette was called and had heard all that went on with the child and the latter's loud weeping. So he followed Tinette, and when she came out of Heidi's room carrying the rolls and the hat, he caught up the hat and said, "I'll see to this old thing." He seems to be quite a neat guy, actually. And that's the end of that chapter. And I shall read one more today, okay? I'm just going to see whereabouts, how far through the book we are. Okay. Not quite halfway. That's good. I'm reading Heidi by Johanna Spyri, and I'm now reading Chapter 9, Mr. Sesemann Takes Heidi's Part. That sounds like taking sides. A few days after these events, there was great commotion and much running up and down stairs in Mr. Sesemann's house. The master had just returned, and Sebastian and Tinette were busy carrying up one package after another from the carriage, for Mr. Sesemann always brought back a lot of pretty things for his home. He himself had not waited to do anything before going in to see his daughter. Heidi was sitting beside her, for it was late afternoon when the two were always together. Father and daughter greeted each other with warm affection, for they were deeply attached to one another. Then he held out his hand to Heidi, who had stolen away into the corner, and said kindly to her, "And this is our little Swiss girl. Come and shake hands with me. That's right. Now tell me, are Clara and you good friends with one another? Or do you get angry and quarrel and then cry and make it up, and then start quarrelling again on the next occasion?" "No, Clara is always kind to me," answered Heidi. "And Heidi," put in Clara quickly, "has not once tried to quarrel." "That's all right. I'm glad to hear it," said her father as he rose from his chair. "But you must excuse me, Clara, for I have had nothing to eat all day. Afterwards I will show you all the things I have brought home with me." He found Miss Rottenmeier in the dining room, and when he had taken his place, she sat down opposite him, looking so gloomy that he turned to her and said, "What is the matter?" "Mr. Sesemann," began the lady in a solemn voice, "we have been frightfully imposed upon." "Indeed? In what way?" asked Mr. Sesemann as he went on calmly drinking his wine. "Well, I supposed I was getting a well-behaved and nicely brought-up little Swiss girl for Clara's companion, but I have been shockingly, disgracefully imposed upon." "But how, and what is there shocking and disgraceful? I see nothing shocking in the child," remarked Mr. Sesemann quietly. "If you only knew the kind of people and animals she has brought into the house during your absence, the tutor can tell you more about that." "Animals? What am I to understand by animals, Miss Rottenmeier?" "It is past understanding. The whole behaviour of the child would be past understanding if it were not that at times she is evidently not in her right mind." At that moment the door opened and the tutor was announced. "Ah, here is someone," exclaimed Mr. Sesemann, "who will help to clear up matters for me. Take a seat," he continued as he held out his hand to the tutor. "And now tell me, what is the matter with this child that has come to be a companion to my daughter?" The tutor started in his usual style. "If I must give my opinion about this little girl, I should like first to state that if on one side there is a lack of development, which has been caused by the more or less careless way in which she has been brought up—" "My good friend," said Mr. Sesemann, "you are giving yourself more trouble than you need. I only want to know what your opinion is as to her being a fit companion or not for my daughter." "I should not like to in any way to prejudice you against her," began the tutor once more, "for if on the one hand there is a certain inexperience of the ways of society, owing to the uncivilized life she led up to the time of her removal to Frankfurt, on the other hand she is endowed with certain good qualities, and taken on the whole—" "Excuse me, my dear sir, do not disturb yourself, but I must. I think my daughter will be wanting me." And with that Mr. Sesemann quickly left the room and went to the study to talk to Clara. And now, my dear, he said, drawing his chair nearer and laying her hand in his, what kind of animals has your little companion brought into the house, and why does Miss Rottenmeier think that she is not always in her right mind? Sorry, slightly itchy. Clara had no difficulty in answering. She told her father everything about the tortoise and the kittens, and explained to him what Heidi had said the day Miss Rottenmeier had been put in such a fright. Mr. Sesemann laughed heartily at her recital. So you do not want me to send the child home again? He asked. You are not tired of having her here? Oh, no, no, Clara exclaimed. Please do not send her away. Time has passed much more quickly since Heidi has been here, for something fresh happens every day, and it used to be so dull, and she has always so much to tell me. That evening, when Mr. Sesemann and Miss Rottenmeier were alone, settling the household affairs, he informed her that he intended to keep Heidi, for his daughter liked her as a companion. I desire, he continued, that the child shall be in every way kindly treated, and that her peculiarities shall not be looked upon as crimes. If you find her too much for you alone, I can hold out a prospect of help, for I am expecting my mother here on a long visit, and she, as you know, can get along with anybody, whatever they may be like. Oh, yes, I know, replied Miss Rottenmeier, but there was no tone of relief in her voice as she thought of the coming help. Mr. Sesemann was only home for a short time. He left for Paris again before the fortnight was over, comforting Clara with the prospect of her grandmother's arrival, which was to take place in a few days' time. Clara talked so much about her grandmother that Heidi began also to call her grandmamma, which brought forth a look of displeasure from Miss Rottenmeier. As she was going to her room that night, Miss Rottenmeier waylaid her and gave her strict orders not to call Mrs. Sesemann grandmamma, but always to say Madam. And that's the end of that chapter. Yes, we're stopping there. There you go. What's going to happen next? I will give you a hint. The next chapter is chapter 10, and it's called Clara's Lovable Grandmother. So I do hope they get along well. I hope that's not a wry title. Anyway, I'm going to give you a couple of links here. The first one is YouTube, and then the second one is Discord. So, YouTube, if you're watching this on Twitch and you want to listen to some more stories, you can go over to my YouTube channel and have a look through the playlists, and you'll find all of the books I've read previously. The stories that I read live on Twitch get recorded and saved, and then they show up in a playlist on YouTube about 2 weeks after I've read them live on Twitch, because Twitch will only keep them for a couple of weeks after I've read them. So you can listen to them here on Twitch. That's great. And I love the fact that you do listen to them here on Twitch when I'm not actually live. That's fantastic. But if you've missed any, you have to wait 2 weeks, but they'll show up again on YouTube. They're the same stories. They just don't have the frame that you see around it here on Twitch. They've got that frame, but they don't have the words up there that say story time and the title of the book and then the chat box over on the right-hand side, because you don't need those over on YouTube. That's for Twitch. And if you're watching this on YouTube, now you know I have playlists, so you can go and listen to the rest of the book and the other books. So there's Millie Molly Mandy, there's Alice, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and also Alice Through the Looking Glass. There is The Wind in the Willows. There is The Secret Garden. There is A Little Princess. There is, we've got some other ones. What are the other ones? Come on, tell me, quick. There's a whole lot of different ones. And they're all old stories that I have read, and there are more to come. So there's also ones like Linnets and Valerians, which most people have never heard of. It's by a lady called Elizabeth Googe. There is another one called The Treasure of the Isle of Mist, which is set in the Hebrides in Scotland. I think it's the Hebrides, or the Orkneys in Scotland, written by a chap called W. Tarn, And he was actually he was an historian kind of sort of thing, and studied the philosophy of different eras, especially the Greeks. And he wrote this one story that he wrote for his daughter just before the First World War. It was published during or after the First World War. And she actually went on to become an early recorder of myths and fables of different people and places, the stories that are handed down by telling them out loud. And she recorded them in a series of books. So I've always wondered if her father talking about his studies, about people from other times and places, and also this fairy story that he told her or read to her, was actually the start of her recording these things for other people as well. You never know. Anyway, there's a whole lot of stories that we've done over there on YouTube, so go and listen to them. And we'll see you here next time. I read 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, live on Twitch, 3 o'clock New Zealand time. And you can find a website that'll tell you what time that'll be for you. And we'll see you next time. Bye.